All right. So today we're going to be looking at line. We're going to redo it. So I just said it and forgot to turn on the recording. So I'm just going to go over it real quick again now that we are recording. We're going to be looking at line as a way of drawing with watercolor, and that watercolor is a tool for drawing. But also because line will get you so familiar with your brushes and with kind of gaining some more control using your watercolors. I'm going to give you a little slideshow on some artists that use watercolor and line in different ways. We will be focusing mainly on Vincent van Gogh as an example. And then we are going to make a page of just lines. And then we will be trying to apply what we learned from making those lines into a drawing using an object around us. Okay, it could be any object. So start looking around for an object that you would like to draw. Okay. So here is an early watercolor of Vincent van Gogh, and you can see it's relying heavily on sense of drawing and charcoal. So there, I even believe that there's charcoal in this. There's watercolor washes on top, and perhaps even using the charcoal for a wash. And it's very much about the outline and kind of filling in the big forms with value and tone. And then some start of the kind of play with line that became so indicative of his work later on. This is a later ink drawing by Van Gogh, and here you can see how he has started to kind of develop a visual language to describe things just in the same way that he described the tree before, except now it's infused with this kind of this energy or rhythm to it based on the different types of lines that are being applied, the type of patterning that is being given to the trees through the use of these lines or in the rocks. So fundamental shift, still relying on the same kind of tools and relying on the same kind of methodology, but kind of shifting to a more explicit use of line. And part of that also, I think, came out of him making these sketchbook drawings, and in that he also started to develop that in his oil paintings, which are, of course, tremendously famous. That completely changed how people were looking at how to use paint. So he was in a way, if you look at Van Gogh's oil paintings, even they're comprised out of chunks of line. They are brushstrokes, continuous brushstrokes, kind of laid aside each other, around each other, on top of each other, usually in a pattern, in the use, the employment of a line. So I find his drawings and his watercolors really telling and a great visual cue into how he looks and deciphers a space or an object or a person, and how he translates that into his own visual language. And they're just beautiful, remarkable drawings. I just love just spending time looking at them, and often just find a whole new passage in ones that I've looked at time and again. Once we go back to regular life and we have access to the library, there's a great double volume set of drawings at the library. So what we're going to do here today is focus on line and pattern. Here you see kind of more of the watercolor being employed as a tool for coloring. And oftentimes you'll see watercolor used this way where an ink drawing is done and the color is applied as a wash around around the line. But what we're going to try to focus on is just using the watercolor as the device in and of itself. So this is also a watercolor, but he's starting to use the paint a little thicker. So a little bit of dry brush here, or a thicker application of the actual watercolor paint. So there's some opacity starting to happen in these paintings he did of studio and grounds around, I believe this is when he was in Paris. And here you can see a little bit of both outline being employed by a charcoal pencil or a pencil, and then watercolor. And here, watercolor being employed throughout the whole thing. So what I want you to notice here is that the line isn't always angular or being used as a punctuation like a dot. Here, the line becomes a lot more organic, this kind of squiggly line that describes the vegetation. Gives you a sense of like that pattern and that rhythm that happens in these fields without describing it so specifically. And that's what he was ultimately going for, was kind of creating these. The sky. The sky is a wash that water has been reintroduced into and everything, and we'll get into that a little bit later on. But what I want us to focus on today is just line. So here, line, and this is a ink drawing that has been kind of colored in with the watercolor. Some use of line, but this is more of what I'm talking about for today. All watercolor, all line. There's a few passages of where it looks like they're filled in, but even those are these thicker groupings of lines, just these marks that are coming down. So this is also going to be about mark making. Mark making describes any sort of mark that you make on the paper or canvas or something as deployed by your brush or whatever implement that you're using. So mark making becomes in many ways kind of the signature, the handwriting of your way of working. So when you're making marks, they have a kind of personal sensibility to it by the way that you hold the brush, the way that you're loading it, the way that you're moving the brush in your hand. So there's lots of different things that add to the vocabulary of a brush mark. And you will be getting more and more of a feel of it as you go on, and you use these tools more and more. You'll be getting more and more familiar with ways to manipulate the tool to kind of create the effect or the mark that you want. So in comparison with Van Gogh is Winslow Homer, who was a tremendous watercolorist, also oil painter, but I really gravitate to his watercolors. And in these, you will see many of these he did as studies, but also he would, these were paintings in and of themselves. A lot of them were in journals. But in this one here with the palms, you can actually see the drawing. So there's areas where he blocks in color, and then to describe the foliage better, he goes back in with line and kind of clearly delineates the palm leaves put some more organic darks into the other trees around it. The bark of the palm, he just gestures in with a line. And compared with something like this, it feels maybe even a little bit more descriptive. I think the oranges begin to be a little bit more mottled, and there's definitely more blocking in of color, in the architecture and everything. But there's a lot of line work and drawing that's just happening to describe these leaves, following the patterns, following the stems. So a good amount of drawing happening within these as well. A different type and sensibility to reacting to the pattern of a tree and the leaves that happen there, and how to juxtapose those to, say, the pattern on the fence, or the solidness of the wall, or the firmness of the ground. John Singer Sargent, also a tremendous watercolorist, and in his oil paintings and his watercolors, there's a lot of brushwork. He was very well known for his brushwork, and kind of the ability to imply the detail of a face or a gesture of clothing, with just very, very limited means, just putting the right mark where it needed to be. So using change of value, change of color, and also thinking about the with Sargent, I always kind of think of bravado. It's very much a performative kind of painting, where there's this gesturing going on. There's this you can sense the presence of the hand making that quick mark. Here's a painting he did of gourds, which is much more dense than a lot of his watercolors, especially. And there's a combination of opaque watercolor in here and transparent watercolor, but preserving the shapes of the gourds, going for the patterning that's happening with the leaves and the light coming through, is what really makes this a dynamic picture. And knowing where to kind of leave space and where to create pattern, and how to move the eye around using line. So in something like this, pay attention to where there are horizontal and vertical lines, or even diagonal lines. There's a real play between where those lines are coming in, and how they're moving the eye around in this space. And then on top of that, through that are these like moments of rest, like in the gourds, or in the upper left-hand corner, that kind of passage of blue, or even these dots of light that are kind of the sky behind coming through. He went to Venice a lot. So you'll see a lot of paintings of Venice. You'll see a lot of people painting Venice, even today. A lot of watercolorists go out there and they try to recapture this moment here. And these are kind of travel sketches, so they're very quick. They're not intended to be more than what they are: a gesture, a kind of summation, or an attempt to depict a very quick moment, or a kind of a memory even. So Sargent was very, very capable at being able to get a lot of information in with very small means. So you can see in the lower left, just the kind of lines that are being used, the gestural lines that are being used to kind of imply the water. That's there's like a tiny little bit of wash underneath it first, and then this larger area of wash where one side of the blue color is starting to mix with the more aqua green color in the middle there. That also helps to develop that shadow. And then on top of that, bringing in these warm sepias, to bring in details, shadow details in the buildings, in the gondola, and so on. But also, one thing I want you to pay attention to, that these lines are not staying the same color. These lines are jumping around a bit. So just as the bridge is arching and you notice like a balcony there, those lines are done with like a blue purple. There's a real attention to how color changes in different spaces too. So, and that some color needs to be repeated in places so that your eye continues to follow it around. That blue purple is helping connect your eye to this nice blue and some of the purple hues that are happening underneath that bridge. So these are very kind of quick decisions that are also really informed decisions about how to actually move a viewer's eye around a picture using color as well as the composition. So that's just one thing I want to draw your attention to as well. You need to switch up that color every now and again. This is Julie Meritu, who is a contemporary artist, and her work employs a lot of different line, a huge vocabulary of line. A lot of it's architectural, then it's very gestural, and it's all kind of in one space. And these are larger pieces that she does with acrylic and ink, and but there's been more exhibitions of her works on paper with like watercolor and ink recently. So I think that she has an amazing sensibility for line and gesture. And these watercolors that I'm just becoming recently acquainted with have they're so much more pared down and kind of amorphous. There's a lot less structure to them, but they still create these patterns. They still use these gestural moments to kind of bring the eye in, move the eye around. And there's just this great amount of play with creating form and pattern and line and making, in this sense, it almost makes this kind of organic shape, but it's basically comprised out of passages of pattern and line and some areas of shape. Ooh, that one's really blurry. Okay, never mind. But this is kind of what we're going to start by doing. Just try to create a space and to create as many varieties of line as we can while moving between color and brushes. Try to use a variety of brushes. So it could be an exercise in just getting more familiar with your brushes, but let's also try to kind of think about it compositionally as well. How do we use this variety of lines? How do we use this variety of brushes and these tools that we have and the colors that we have to help move the eye around a picture plane? So here's our two-part line assignment. And we'll be working on this for the next couple classes. So today and on Tuesday. So the first part of this will be to fill the entire paper with lines. There can be, you could make this by, how you kind of doodle. You could just kind of make a line and just continue to follow that pattern. But what I want you to see is that you change the variety of line weights and speed, maybe change the color, and then try to fill up as much of the page as you can. And this doesn't have to be one single continuous line. This can be broken up lines. Like Van Gogh, you can use like lines and Julie Mayer too to create pattern. So this is going to be an experimental sheet that will just allow us to kind of get familiar with our brushes, get familiar with using line and how to mix the right amount of water, maybe even use a little bit more paint than water, or use it very lightly. So we're going to be experimenting with that as well. And then on the back, you can use the same sheet of paper on the back. Then you'll create a drawing of an object that's near you, using just line. So it'll be kind of going back to basic drawing. You're just going to do a contour line drawing of an object, and then you're going to use line and pattern to kind of fill it in. No washes, no big blocks of color. Everything should be a line or a punctuation or creating a pattern. So it should have a rhythm to it, like Van Gogh. So think about those Van Gogh paintings that I showed you in the beginning, and try to emulate something close to that. And I think that will give you a really great feeling of like how between the two you'll have this kind of more free form approach, and then you'll have it in service of trying to represent something. So you can do it on a separate sheet of paper, each one on a separate sheet of paper if you'd like, but if you want to kind of preserve the amount of paper that you have, you're totally welcome to do it on the back. The papers, as long as you don't use big washes, which you're not supposed to be doing, the paper will withstand that type of abuse or use.